concerned to hear some state premiers talking about still pursuing a zero COVID strategy even after 70 to 80% of Australians have come forward and been vaccinated. They'll be continuing to pursue that mirage on the horizon of zero COVID. And the dangerous thing about a mirage is not just that it's not there and you can never reach it, but what is lost in the pursuit of it in the meantime, the very heavy cost that you bear. And I think the state premiers are making a misjudgment politically if they think that by the time we actually have hit 70 to 80% vaccination, that the public is going to willingly accept border closures and lockdowns and other tough measures. The political compact in this country that every political leader is offering their people is if you come forward and do your part and get vaccinated, then when the time comes, we'll do our part and release you from these restrictions and your life can return to something like it resembled before. I think political leaders who break that compact, who walk away from that, will be harshly punished. Well, of course, Paul, Victoria has unfortunately had the worst of both worlds. It's had the longest lockdown, 200 days of lockdown, and the largest number of deaths. But to Andrew's point, vaccination is not just the path out for New South Wales, it's the path out for all of us. The lockdown has been terrible in New South Wales and the outbreak is very serious. But last year in Victoria's lockdown and outbreak, 800 people died. So far in New South Wales, only 48 people have died. And the reason why that number is not hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times larger is because they've vaccinated largely the vulnerable and at-risk people. So I don't think that lockdowns are justified when the risk of hospitalisation and complications and death from COVID are massively reduced, as we've seen from the United Kingdom, for example, where those priority exposed groups have been vaccinated. And although there is COVID circulating, there is very little hospitalisation and even less death. I'm very concerned about what I'm hearing from my constituents about the impact of this latest lockdown on them, that it is reviving the memories they had of the terrible experience they had last year. I agree with some of the comments you made in your editorial about the way in which the Victorian government has ramped up the fear about this outbreak, the way in which they've used alarmist and inflammatory language, for example, comparing this outbreak to measles, with no scientific justification for that. But I would ask that they really carefully consider the evidence base when they make decisions like that, because it has a profound effect on people's lives. And some of these regional communities have been locked down without ever having had a case in the entire pandemic since the beginning. And I mean, that is really a disproportionate burden. The two most effective and influential people who have stoked vaccine hesitancy in this country are Mark McGowan and Anastasia Palaszczuk, because they have undermined the very rationale for people to come forward and get vaccinated by saying they won't necessarily return your freedoms, they won't necessarily end lockdowns, they won't necessarily open up the borders again, even if you do your part and come forward and get vaccinated. And lo and behold, which are the two states that have the slowest vaccine rollout in the country? Exactly. Western Australia and Queensland. It's not a coincidence, it's very tightly linked. I think they're playing a dangerous game. Unfortunately, there could be an outbreak in Western Australia or Queensland at any time, as there has been in Victoria and New South Wales and over in New Zealand. And even if there isn't an outbreak, the rest of the country is going to get back to normal a long time before Queensland or Western Australia ever can, because we're going to get vaccinated first and we're going to be able to get out of lockdown and end the border closures first. Do they really want to be isolated from the rest of the country and from the rest of the world? And do they really want to be threatening lockdowns on their constituents any longer than they need to? They shouldn't. They should come back to the national plan. They should stick to what they promised, not just to the Prime Minister and to each other, but what they promised to their own people.